Great. Hi, Satish. Good to
Hi,
see
Ken.
you. The next episode on design thinking. And today, let's talk about certain researches that we've been doing. And we see that empathy is really an area of concern that's coming up within organizations. Not that empathy was a concern earlier, but because stresses and abnormal situations is something that people are facing. There's a lot of flux that people are into. And that is really, really now bringing up this whole area of empathy out. And I think
Absolutely.
it would be a great conversation to go through. So let's
Ye-
begin. The whole idea today is to talk about how do you design empathy within the organization?
Yes,
Right? So
absolutely. A very
talk about
important and relevant topic.
empathy-centric organizations today
Absolutely.
and the designs. So let's get cracking.
Yes, so Niket, looking forward to this interesting topic. After we spoke about the importance of psychological capital in the last episode and its importance on employee experience, right? So, what role does empathy play in all of this in continuation with our last episode?
Empathy possibly is the softest part of life.
Okay.
Nobody really talks about empathy
Mm-hmm.
normally in life.
Okay.
Okay, it's very uncomfortable to really get talking about empathy, and our entire concept of empathy is limited through the management paradigm of getting into someone else's shoes.
Yes.
Correct. That's what I mean. Whenever you talk about empathy, people say, oh, it's all about getting into someone else's shoes. But it's beyond that. And I think it's very important to delve into emotional intelligence because
Mm-hmm.
that's where empathy really comes up.
Okay.
But empathy as a beginner, if we were to really take on, it's about understanding the other person's world. And it
Hmm.
doesn't stop there. It's also understanding what the other person is feeling and your ability to have conversations around what that person is feeling. And
Right.
that is very dangerous
Hmm.
because we're not taught to do that.
Correct.
But before we get on to the next question, if people were to really understand the feelings that other people are going through, the emotions that other people are going through. Now, what's the difference between a feeling and an emotion? I mean, I've been teaching emotional intelligence for possibly the last 15 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling is an intelligent system within us which decodes and understands the emotions that we're going through.
Okay.
It's a higher intelligence available within us. Now, if we were to use this higher intelligence to understand the feelings of other people, needs practice. But let's say if we are not intuitive enough to do that, we can always have conversations around how are you feeling right now,
Right.
correct? And the more toxicity in a relationship, the more the chance of separation.
Right.
So that's the beginning context of empathy.
Yeah. So you've been doing a lot of research through the interventions that you are engaging with in the corporates, and largely your engagement, as I see it, is in the large multinational enterprises. We see a huge disconnect among levels across the organization. All
Yeah.
right. Would you like to share some of the insights that you have gained through these interventions with our audience?
So obviously, my whole area of research is resilience.
Yes.
Correct. And post pandemic, the whole idea of resilience is really, really up on priority for everybody.
Yes, it is.
Now let's understand and let's empathize even with the CXO levels. What are they going through? Number one, the paradigms that have worked till now are no longer working.
True.
Correct. Owning up that my experiences are no longer holding the ground today is a very difficult proposition for senior people. KPI orientation is very high.
Yes.
I mean, come on. I mean, in my resilience doctoral thesis, I'm actually writing about the phases that organizations are going through today. So, before the pandemic, the organizations were not really prepared to deal with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be because these are black swan effects.
Yes.
Correct. You can't be. Now, all of a sudden, the pandemic strikes. If you had the resources available with you, including the cash flow, or maybe just general reserves, if I were to go the balance sheet way, you could still absorb the shock. But the pandemic was long enough for organizations to really use whatever cash they had at their disposal. So obviously, KPIs started gaining grounds. And before even moving into the recovery phase, while they were into the absorption phase, the stress levels went up so much because, in any case, in organizations before the pandemic, they didn't really look at the chronic stresses that were there. Now, A, the pandemic hits you, B, there are chronic stresses which are accumulating within the supply chains of organization. The compounding effect actually took a massive toll on the entire social capital within the organization.
Okay.
Nobody knew how to work remote. And what happened is the trust level that, people actually work remote. There's no problem. My
Yeah.
goals will get accomplished. All that was a new paradigm because all this while managers and leaders were used to seeing people right in front of them and the feeling, and that's come out very well in our researches also,
Yes, it is.
that they could see people in front of them made them comfortable. But now that they could not see people, the stresses in them also grew. In fact, a lot of places where I was conducting this research, and you were also part of it, people have said that the conflict has gone up when they started working remote.
Yes.
Now, if the conflict went up earlier, senior management, the middle management, and people down the pyramid, they would actually sit together, maybe have a cup of coffee or have lunch together, and they could sort it out.
Yes.
But that dynamics was not there anymore. Also, what happened is nearly 1.5, 2 years of separation. People didn't come to office. And even if they came for a short while. Work from home started becoming a pattern.
Yes.
So conflicts were not being resolved. So what happened is the empathy gap between various layers of the organization started growing. And why are we talking about only layers which are vertical, even horizontal? Colleagues also started experiencing these gaps. And that's where we are today. And that's why possibly everybody in our research is reporting that the empathy factor has dipped.
Yes.
Well, it wasn't there.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Talked about empathy. The situation was normal. And in normal situation, conflicts were normal. They could be resolved.
Yes. And people were used to those working conditions before the pandemic. So
Yes.
empathy, while it played only a very small portion of the role, like you said, the disputes were resolved across the table or over a coffee.
Yes.
In the pandemic, people were bombarded with a lot of online meetings, one behind the other, and they did not really get time to address or resolve these issues in a timely manner, adding to the stress that people went through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was internal stress within people because they were trying to adapt.
Yes.
There was stress in the environment. The whole thing was in a flux. And there were stresses within the organization. So the stresses had really compounded. And because the stresses had compounded, what happened is the whole vacuum of empathy that existed within the organization came out all in the open.
True.
Yeah. But then there were a set of people who actually were empathetic. So let's not really say that nobody carried empathy. There were people who carried empathy.
Yes.
And as we move through the conversation, we will see that probably there are some people who can be good empathy coaches within the organization. Because we are now in a situation where we have to teach people how to work in an empathetic mode.
Right. So one of the things that we've seen in our research through our engagement with and interviewing so many people, we are noticing that leadership teams are in a dilemma of how to motivate and keep employees positively engaged.
Yeah.
In this phase of great resignations, which is a hot topic at this point in time, what is your advice to those leadership people as to how they can keep their people engaged?
One is, let's understand the root cause. Why are people resigning?
Yeah.
People are resigning because this whole empathy issue is creating a gap and people feel that they're not valued.
Mm-hmm.
Look, in any relationship, if you feel you're not valued, it's over.
True.
Correct. Now, because this whole empathy gap has set into the organization, because people feel that they're not being valued, obviously, you will start looking for greener pastures.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the reward, recognition, appreciation for any superlative performance is a requirement.
Yes.
And what's coming out in our research is we're not very, we're very pricey about appreciating people. We're too precious about it.
Yeah.
So one is the empathy is taking a beating. Second is we aren't appreciating people. Okay. Third, there's a tremendous drive to achieve KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were to look at all these factors that are interplaying, what's happening is people are saying, no. I mean, I've got too many negative emotional attractors right now within my system. I can't cope up with it. I'm feeling toxicity within me. Plus, my own value systems have undergone change. I want work-life balance.
Yeah.
For me, my family has become important. For me, my own time has become important.
Yeah.
I know for sure that in some of the researches that came out that people took on to education,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were pursuing academics
Yes.
because they had the time and they could never do that before.
Yeah.
And also with this new world that we are in, which is the post-pandemic world, which is the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that we live in. Not that VUCA is new, it's been there for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
But the point is that people realize that the existing knowledge and existing competencies are not going to help them. So they're getting into the vertical development. They are deciding how to develop themselves, how to groom themselves. And therefore, what's happening is the best of the people have indulged massively in personal development. And now they're saying, hey, look, there are enough opportunities available. Because a lot of organizations today have moved through, in the theory of resilience, if I have to say, they have moved from absorption into recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And they have touched the point of growth.
Okay.
Because a lot of CEOs are highly growth oriented. And they've been innovative. They've accomplished the growth. And therefore, organizations get to know which are the ones who are doing well, which are not doing well, because there's a conversation within the organization about competition. And also the research is evolving and saying people are also looking at shifts which are outside of what they were, the domain that they were working in. They're wanting to try out new domains.
True.
Now, with all this, opportunities existing, new domains coming up, organizations moving into growth phase, and who doesn't want to work for a winner? Everybody wants to work for a winner. This is compounding the effect further. Now, imagine if empathy would have been there and if people would have been well connected, and even if the organization is at a point of absorption or recovery, they would still cling on together as a team. They would still work together. And that's where I want to broach on the topic of sense of purpose.
Yeah.
We're going to definitely have a conversation on sense of purpose, maybe in subsequent episodes. But the point is, sense of purpose is very important for teams to bind. And if that's not happening, then we got trouble on hand. So multiple things happening.
Yes.
Great opportunities existing, people not feeling valued, empathy gap setting in, and therefore you got opportunities coming to you on a platter, you move.
Absolutely.
And the best of the guys say, hey, you know what? That's something that happened to me when I moved out of my corporate career. And I said, if I can get so many, possibly $1 million or $1 billion for the organization, can't I do it for myself?
Absolutely.
And if that thought gets into your mind, then you become an entrepreneur.
Yes.
So
what we are saying.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, the gig workers, the digital nomads, all said and done, they have an entrepreneurial spirit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we look at KPIs, which has been a strong or a very vociferous bone of contention among the interviews that we've conducted, most organizations, should I rather say all organizations, are KPI driven these days.
Yeah.
Okay, people have taken a big fancy to it, and they're experiencing stress due to ununiform goals. While it's easy for some of them to achieve and meet their KPIs easily, for others, and that's a significant number, there's a lot of effort that goes into actually achieving those results.
Correct.
So what is your specific insight into this from your interventions?
I'm not anti-KPI.
Certainly.
Okay. KPIs are a must. But KPI is not the whole world of business. Now let's understand this whole idea of KPI. As long as we did not have flux in the environment, and this flux will now exist always.
Yeah.
As long as possibly the flux was minimal, if not there, if it was when it was minimal, you still knew how to accomplish your KPIs.
Yeah.
Because there were certain set rules.
Yes.
There were certain set relationships. All that was there. Now, all of a sudden, you have a black swan effect coming. And would there be more black swan effects coming?
There will
Absolutely.
be.
There will be lots of black swan effects, and they could actually increase in frequency and intensity.
Yes.
Yeah, because there are chronic stresses happening in the in the environment.
Absolutely.
There is political uncertainty. There is economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
There is a social shift.
Yeah.
There's technological disruption. There are environmental issues that we're talking about. We will
Yes.
also do possibly someday a conversation around circular economy. That's something which has fascinated me in my research.
Sure.
And then obviously there are changes in legal systems and compliances. Governance factors are changing. So KPI becomes a different way of achieving. It's not going to be achieved typically the way it was achieved before the pandemic.
Right.
The rules of the game have changed. The management paradigms have changed. Past experiences aren't working anymore. And therefore, people are struggling to achieve their KPIs. Now, how can you achieve your KPI? To achieve your KPI, design centricity becomes important. You're going to design your success now.
Right.
It's not about, going to a customer and saying, hey, I've been doing business with you for so long. I'm a sales guy. Give me the deal. He'll not give you the deal because things have changed. Maybe in supply chain, the KPIs could be accomplished, but now there are chronic stresses. Or maybe the supply chain needs to be redesigned because it isn't resilient anymore.
Yeah.
And haven't we seen it in our research? There are so many supply chains which are failing because they are not resilient.
True.
So the point is that until and unless KPIs are balanced with the softer side of the human dimension, which is your factor of empathy, which is the factor of bonding, which is the factor of valuing people. I mean, ultimately, all this comes down to empathy only. But until and unless I value people with whom I'm working, and these could be my immediate reportees, it could be my colleagues, it could be my boss. I mean, somebody, if I'm reporting to somebody, I must value my boss also. I must empathize with my boss also because my boss is also stressed.
Correct.
And that's the area. You have to now empathize with your stakeholders. You have to empathize with possibly your partners in supply chain, your vendors. Because if you don't empathize with them, it's the same thing. They're also going to resign. They're going to say, thank you very much. I mean, haven't we seen in many conversations there where people are saying, even vendors are saying, thank you very much, we don't want to work with you anymore. You're not empathizing that today I cannot forecast when I can deliver stuff to you. Give me the predictions, give me a commitment, I'll stock, I'll put my money in, give me the money on time or maybe before time. People are now getting into spot conversations. All that is becoming a part of it. And if I were to refuse it, and I don't understand the problem that the other person is going through, I'm not showing empathy. Those relationships are going to break off.
True.
So KPI, if KPI is on the x-axis, on the y-axis, empathy has to be there.
Okay.
So be high on KPI orientation. But if you want to be high on KPI orientation, be high on the empathy factor also. And if you are able to operate in that quadrant, which is the high on KPI and empathy, you've got your equations right. But it's not the end of the story, because on the z-axis, you have the design axis. Right. And you've got to be high on design too. So if you were to look at a three-dimensional model, high on KPI, high on empathy, high on design, you got it right.
Certainly. And that brings me to the next question, where we're saying that organizations now need to undertake empathy process. Design thinking, because it's a complex human-centric problem.
It is.
Right. So to retain people, to keep them engaged, keep them motivated, and
get the best performance out of them too.
Absolutely. And then beat the great resignations spree that is going on right now. They need to undertake design thinking, and that is probably a more sustainable way, more scientific way to implement the empathy-based process. What do you have to say?
So let's talk about the great resignations first.
Sure.
It's a nice fancy word that's come up post the black swan effect. It's always been there. In every organization, I think possibly where you worked, where I worked, we spent enough time in the corporate.
Yes.
Any organization where the empathy factor dipped, we moved. We didn't work there.
Yeah.
So best of the performers are going to move. But in our point of time, the opportunities were not so many.
Yeah.
Yeah, but today opportunities are massive. So
Yeah.
the migration is also very easy now. Correct. Now, if we were to do this, if we were to say that the migration is easy and great resignations have always been there, what are we going to do to control this great resignation? Very simple. Help people become successful in their careers. And while they become successful in their careers, you also ensure that the organization becomes successful.
Mm.
Yeah. So both have to go together.
Yeah.
But if both have to go together, and you're right what you're saying, it's a complex human centric problem because ultimately human beings are complex. We've got our behaviors, we've got our attitudes, we've got our beliefs, we've got a bunch of skill sets, we've acquired competencies over a period of time. We have brought up our nurturing. The school that we went through played a very critical role. The family values that we bring, so all that upbringing is also part of our personality. Now, if we were to look at that, that's a complex human centric problem. And therefore, if we have a diversity that exists within the organization, obviously we will have to now prototype how empathy will be demonstrated within the organization. Because one is to go through an emotional intelligence workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows empathy is important. I mean, there's no rocket science.
Yeah.
Correct. I mean, if you were to tell any person, leaders, or maybe anybody down the line and say, empathy is very important, and they'll look at you and say, yeah, but we already always knew that. But what is this empathy? How does this empathy transfer in our organization? What is the definition of empathy in our organization? Because every organization will have different definitions of empathy.
Yeah.
Though the root will be understanding other people's world, getting into their shoes, understanding their feelings and emotions. But how do we ensure that the empathy actually is practiced within the organization? People need to know that.
Correct.
So when you use design thinking, which in any case is an empathy-driven process, because it starts with empathizing,
Mm-hmm.
then you get into the definition of the problem.
Yeah.
Then you define the opportunity, then you ideate, then you prototype, then you test and you scale.
Yeah.
And that's the non-linear process, but you start with empathy. So I've noticed one thing. When prototypes were being made, people learned empathizing because it needs practice.
Mm-hmm.
In design thinking, when you conduct interviews, when you ask questions, you open up to suggestions and ideas of other people.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to arrive at the root cause of the problem, you're talking to your stakeholders. The process makes you open to understanding the problems that other people are going through. Normally, it is my problem, and I don't care much about your problem. But
Right.
design thinking is about what's your problem.
Problem. Right.
And let's come together and solve it. Therefore, even ideation process is empathetic. The prototype design part is empathetic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you're testing the prototype, you're asking from the stakeholders, how do you find this prototype? That's empathizing. Statistically, you're empathizing now.
Yeah.
And then you're scaling. And scaling is also empathizing because what are we doing? You're telling people, thank you very much for your feedback. The statistical scores are showing very high probabilities. And therefore, since there is a buy-in, here we are with a prototype and we're going to execute it. So, to cut the long story short, design thinking, an empathy-driven nonlinear process, helps you to prototype how empathy will be demonstrated within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got it. Then you
Right.
should tell everybody, this is what empathy means in our organization. That's it.
Sure. And earlier on, you talked about empathy coaches that need to be there in organizations.
Yeah.
Who would or what kind of a person, maybe a personality type or some of the skills that he demonstrates, who would be ideal empathy coach?
So let's understand this first. Once you have a prototype ready,
Yeah.
an empathy prototype ready,
Mm-hmm.
not many people will be able to practice that prototype.
Mm-hmm.
They would need support.
Mm-hmm.
And the support, therefore, must come from empathy coaches.
Okay.
Look, in design thinking, I always say, even to ensure that your prototype becomes successful when you deploy it, it
Right.
requires an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the ecosystem, one of the parts of the ecosystem is the chief empathy officer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, post-pandemic, the research is also showing that organizations must invest in a chief empathy officer,
Okay.
whose core responsibility, KPI, is to ensure that empathy is demonstrated within the organization and there could be measurable results around that. In fact, empathy-driven organizations are highly profitable.
Mm-hmm.
They're highly resilient. They're able to manage change effectively.
Okay.
Now, with whether you have a chief empathy officer or not, that's a different question. But you can always have empathy coaches.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who are trained on emotional intelligence. They're natural coaches. They value people. Therefore, it may not only be a psychometric tool, it could be also in your hierarchy of values, where do you rate people? So if I have to ask you, what are those 5 or 6 important things in your life? And if people happen to be a part of that hierarchy of values, you're on. You can be an empathy coach.
Right.
Correct. Now, these empathy coaches must know emotional intelligence and they also have to be coached on what is coaching.
Okay.
So they become empathy coaches.
Right.
These empathy coaches then connect with people who are finding it difficult to execute the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have to go into MBTI,
Mm-hmm.
people who are feelings F
Okay.
can be great empathy coaches
Okay.
because they harmonize relationships.
Okay.
But that's not the end point. I
Okay.
mean, you can't say that, okay, because I'm not an F, I'm not an F,
Hmm.
I'm a T.
Hmm.
But the point is, I've learned to empathize
Okay.
because I have operated in the space of coaching for the last so many years that you
Okay.
can't be a coach unless you empathize.
Right. And not most companies do MBTI assessment of their leadership. Probably a few of them in every organization, maybe having done his MBTI, so his personality type is known, but most people otherwise don't get the MBTI.
Well, you're right. Mostly large brands tend to do MBTI
Mm-hmm.
because they look at it. I mean, most of the organizations, traditional organizations, look at it as an expense.
Hmm.
They
Yeah.
don't look at it as an investment.
Investment.
Psychometric tools are investments.
Yes.
Secondly, MBTI is a permanent document of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have a step 2 report, it gives you your in preference, out of preference behaviors. From there, you can also find out. In fact, that report is so beautiful. It can actually tell you how to get along with people.
Mm-hmm.
You have to treasure that conversation. So, debriefing of MBTI is very critical.
Okay.
Sitting down with an MBTI practitioner, talking about the report, and then treasuring the report for the rest of your life. In fact, I also say that it's important for you to go discuss the report at home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's no dark secret in that. You're born with the personality and you'll go with the personality.
Right.
But if there are certain out of preference behaviors, your family can help you by giving you a feedback and correcting you, alerting you, cautioning you. So MBTI helps for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
However, even if your personality type is not a feelings oriented, you can also have traits. So there are a lot of trait tools.
Mm-hmm.
Pyrob throws open. How do you connect with people? That's a fantastic tool on interpersonal dynamics.
Okay.
You have Savile as an inventory. I've loved that inventory. And you could actually find out how that person is relating with people. And then you sit down and you say, okay, these are the corrections, get into an environment. And when empathy coaches start operating with the empathy prototype, they become a lot more empathetic.
Okay.
So you can actually have senior leaders going through an empathy process, sitting down and doing a debrief, and then engaging with the prototype. Empathy becomes a part of the culture.
Right.
So all this is possible for sure.
So, Niket, I'm changing gears, moving to another aspect of what happens in organizations. We've seen through our engagements that ownership and accountability is getting compromised right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
It's not only because of lack of empathy, but even because the employees feel that the work design is not appropriate to the activities that individual is being measured on.
Possible.
So there is definitely a need to review and revise the work designs, which will improve the ownership and accountability among employees.
So I think my study of ownership and accountability, and in supply chains, we are seeing the massive noise area that comes up is because of ownership and accountability only.
Yeah.
There are various reasons that I've identified in my research.
Mm-hmm.
One is certainly that the person's willingness level itself is low.
Mm-hmm.
His inherent motivation
Okay.
to operate in an area which is challenging is not there.
Okay.
They're looking at a standard, normal situation where you don't have to really, kind of stretch yourself. It's a great 9 to 5 job, but that's not happening anymore.
Okay.
There are challenges.
Yeah.
So that's one area where ownership and accountability is competing, because I don't want to engage. I don't have the motivation to engage.
Right.
The second is I may not have the skills, because the organization did not groom me up, didn't develop me, and I don't know what to do. So I say, thank you very much. I can't handle this job. But I don't say I can't handle this job. I got to give 10,000 reasons for not doing the job. Correct? I could maybe not interested in doing that job. I may be highly motivated. I may be highly skilled and competent, but I'm not keen on doing a job. And has that happened to me? Yes, it's happened to me. Possibly that's happened to you also. You just get bored. You don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where work design becomes very important. One is rotation. Maybe, you rotate the person and you put that person into a job that's interesting, but you can't do that often.
Yeah.
So the whole study is, how do you make that job interesting? And that's what work design is all about. You got your basic job description in place, and then you're conducting an interview. Possibly it could be a stay interview.
Right.
And you try and find out what is it that interests you given this job. And when the person defines that interest area, now you create an ecosystem by which the person can actually execute that work design, provide that learning opportunity to the person so that the job can be executed. Just don't leave them high and dry.
Right. Right.
Finally, lack of ownership can also happen because there is no sense of purpose in the organization. The organization is, there's a mission vision, which is a beautiful piece of ornament on the reception area.
Yeah.
But nothing is being practiced. The leadership is not practicing any sense of purpose. Now, if the passion, if the sense of purpose is not there in the organization, then again, you're like headless chicken going all over the place.
Right.
Then you can't expect ownership to happen because people don't know where they're going. And then you've got bodies coming to the office and going back home. There has to be soul in the body. And that soul, therefore, will someday just revolt and say, hey, look for a new job. That's it.
Yeah.
And they go.
Right. So, yeah, there has to be some amount of empathy while you're making work designs.
The thought that you want to make a work design itself calls for empathy.
Certainly. So you'll probably do it right, is what I'm saying, if that's the way it is approached. When we talk about empathy coaches and that they are going to handhold the employees in the organization, what sort of behavioral modifications do you recommend organizations to do or to consciously build through the empathy coaches?
So it all depends on the unique prototype that gets built.
Okay.
See, in design thinking, and typically my work, my research, my doctoral thesis on resilience and VUCA, every organization has a very unique prototype. It cannot be replicated. It's your culture, and culture can never be replicated. Right? Empathy being demonstrated in a hospital, empathy being demonstrated in manufacturing can be different.
Right.
Correct? But empathy between two hospitals will also be different, and empathy between two manufacturing units will also be different.
Will be different, yes.
And you can't copy the culture.
Yes, absolutely.
So you got to deduce what empathy means in your organization, and that's very unique. Sit down together and have conversations, and therefore the prototype comes up. And once the prototype is defined, then you can run 360s or psychometric tools and then see where is it that you will have a problem with the prototype. But you can't do this with everybody within the organization.
Right.
And that is where the chief empathy officer, empathy coaches, leaders as coaches, mentors, these are all processes of empathy. They handhold with people and make people successful. That's the only way the new organizations are going to operate. The traditional way is not going to work anymore.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot of organizations have taken a lot of time to understand where things need to improve. And then in our engagements or in the interaction with the employees, empathy is coming out loud and clear,
Everywhere.
isn't it?
Everywhere.
So I guess that's one area of focus that the leadership in organizations has to be conscious of and make a very studied decision of building empathy coaches and
One
implementing.
is one is the leadership has to realize that empathy is an important facet of management.
True.
That itself is a humongous task because we're
Agreed.
so hardwired on KPI.
Hmm.
I mean, the hardware is so prominent within the organization.
Yes.
The structure, your systems, your processes, your KPIs. And I have no quarrels with that. But what about the software? Software cannot be something that's only on your computers and your mobile phones. There is a software in management also.
Yeah.
So one is to understand that empathy is critical. Second is to practice it.
True.
I can understand empathy is important because I've read books. But to practice empathy, I need to really be in a situation and a surrounding where empathy is a part of a culture and maybe it's demanded. How many
Correct.
people demand empathy within the organization? Very few.
Very few. And it's unlike the KPI route, right? Where the KPI is time bound and it's bound by numbers that one needs to achieve within a specific period of time. Empathy can't be done that way. Empathy can't, one can't say in the next 3 months, I want to be an empathetic
No, and
organization.
you can't tell somebody that tomorrow 9 o'clock I'm going to be empathetic with you. That's possibly the
Absolutely.
worst statement ever made.
Absolutely.
Empathy is now, right now.
Right now.
I mean, two
Absolutely.
of us are having this conversation. Unless and until we empathize with each other, we can't have this conversation.
You're right.
Aren't there shows where people just don't connect?
Oh, plenty of times.
Why they don't connect? Because they just don't empathize.
Yes. But everyone wants to have his own way rather than finding a midway or a way which or a solution which is probably common in the benefit of the organization.
Well, a common solution normally happens when situations are very tough and therefore it becomes a conscious decision. That's more of a compromise.
So,
But you can always have a third alternative. And I think in my own life, whether it is my clients, whether it is people with whom I work, I've always noticed there's a third alternative available, which is best for both.
true.
We have to look beyond compromises. We have to look for third alternatives. And that works. But to get into the third alternative, I have to understand the other person's world.
Which is very important.
It's very important. And the other person has to understand my world too. And after we've understood each other's worlds, then we have to look at the intersection. And then we arrive at a third solution. So it takes time.
So that makes the prototype that gets designed and the solutions, the low-hanging fruits that come out of it that one wants to implement in the next, let's say, 45 days after the implementation starts. Unlike other prototypes which can be implemented immediately, and we can start measuring how things are progressing, empathy will, the touch and feel of empathy's prototype will have to be gauged over a period of time.
21 days.
Okay.
Shorter than 45 days.
Okay.
Look, it's an empirical thing. And what is the empirical thing? That if you practice something consciously for 21 days, it becomes a part of you.
Oh, okay. That way you're saying. Okay.
Whether it's a good habit or a bad habit.
True. It becomes practice second nature after 21 days.
So if for 21 days you're reminding yourself, I'm going to practice empathy. And this prototype tells me what empathy is within my organization. And empathy within organization and empathy at home could have two different prototypes. But empathy remains the same. You got it. It becomes a very natural process. But you can't practice it intermittently. You can't say, Monday, I can't be empathetic because that's the first day of the week. Yeah. Friday, I'll be definitely empathetic. No problem at all. Middle of the week, I may decide certain hours I'll be empathetic, certain hours I'll not be empathetic. That's not the way empathy works. And by the way, empathy does not mean that you're compromising on your goals at all.
True.
Empathy primarily means I understand how you feel. I'm willing to have conversations with you about how you feel. Yet we tend to decide how is it that we're going to achieve our goals.
Right. So it does not mean that you can't demand results.
No, you have to.
Absolutely, because the KPIs are important.
Organization, you promised in your contract letter that you will deliver the KPIs.
Absolutely.
How can you ever go back on it? You can't.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But there is no empathy contracted in the appointment letter, no?
True.
Where is the paragraph on empathy there? How many times in an interview have people checked the empathy factor or the empathy quotient of the person? Never.
No.
No.
It's only about past achievements and the skills that one has.
Or making a person wait itself is lack of empathy. Not responding to emails is a lack of empathy. They're simple things.
Right.
Somebody has called you, not calling back is lack of empathy. Not honoring commitments, not honoring expectations is lack of empathy. And empathy is seen in small things that we do. Empathy is not seen in the kind of maybe increments that are given to people or promotions that are given to people. They may surely come because of various other reasons other than empathy.
True. True. So does that mean that empathy should be a top-down approach? It should start from the top management. They need to start demonstrating it more often, more frequently, at the same time demanding results.
Yeah.
And that's how the culture will get built across the organization.
Yes. People do watch senior leadership.
Yes.
And people definitely mirror senior leadership.
Yes, they do.
Therefore, if the senior leadership is empathetic, the culture of the organization becomes empathetic. You can't order empathy. Yes. You can't do a training program and say, the leadership comes into the room and says, look, we've trained you up on empathy, or we've given you an e-learning course on empathy. By the way, we've designed an e-learning course, right, on empathy.
Yes.
On Atesa Online. You can't take that course and say, all right, now that the course is over, tomorrow morning, everybody comes with empathy. No, it doesn't work like that.
True.
It has to be practiced by people at the top first.
True.
Then it becomes a value. And once people get hooked on to the whole concept of empathy within the organization, they'll not leave. In the worst of the times, people will stick together and ensure that the company recovers and grows. Therefore, Black Swan events demand that senior leadership demonstrates empathy.
Yeah, and empathy, unlike any other online courses or a training program, you can't say, okay, because of this investment of time and resources that we have done, we want to see a 20% improvement or a 30% improvement. The improvement in empathy will lead to building, will be visible through the culture of the organization right through.
So currently the research paper that I'm working on is empathy, certainly I'm talking about, but I'm saying that agility correlates with resilience.
Yes, it does.
Resilience correlates with agility. However, empathy is the core driver. Now, correct. Unless I am empathetic about my customer, why should I be agile?
Correct.
Unless I'm empathy about even the fictional entity called my company, my brand, unless I empathize with my company, why should I be agile?
Right.
So, in order to respond to a black swan effect, I need to demonstrate agility. When I'm demonstrating agility, I'm also demonstrating resilience. When agility comes along with resilience, you get onto a recovery path. But in order to demonstrate agility and in order to demonstrate resilience, people have to stick together because you can't win these battles alone.
Yes.
Correct. So agility and resilience both ultimately connect to empathy. And that's the research paper I'm currently working on. Possibly it'll take me another 2 months to get the research paper out, but surely there's a correlation. And ultimately, these three factors connect to the profits of the organization. Why wouldn't a customer like to deal with you if you demonstrate empathy? Yes. And empathy doesn't mean demonstrating empathy with the customer who's not treating you well. I'm not even suggesting that. The core respect, mutual respect has to exist in every relationship. And if the other person is not valuing you, it's your call what you want to do. But you don't have to burn bridges. You can just say, thank you very much. I don't think we can work together. I empathize with you. That's the way your organization works. That's the way my organization works. We can't do business. But if there is empathy happening between the partnership, there's no way you would want to get into these conversations ever with your customer.
Yes, I agree with you. And empathetic culture will mean the employees will stretch themselves to deliver more. They would always... They
don't even feel that they're stretching themselves. That's the best part of it.
Yes. Yeah. They don't feel.
Yeah, they do it out of a good feel. That's it.
Absolutely. There's no stress in that. Like otherwise they would talk about it.
I mean, we were talking about it right today when we were driving back, and I said, help is such a powerful proposition.
Yeah.
That it makes people guilty to walk away out of your life.
Yeah.
And people are so miserly about helping people. Help. What are we doing in these live streams? We're helping.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. And we're just saying, come. Take this research knowledge that we're creating, content that we're creating for you. Go use it.
And I guess the effort that an organization is trying to make and be more KPI oriented to see the kind of top line growth and the bottom line growth and the customer satisfaction survey results improving, or the employee satisfaction surveys improving over the previous year. A culture of empathy, you don't need to focus on all these areas. These areas will automatically be taken care of.
Metrics are important. I like the word, you don't have to focus on it. You can genuinely take a score on how our empathy is doing when you conduct all these surveys.
Yes.
But these surveys are not done for cosmetic value.
Absolutely.
Right? So first survey could be done to understand the root cause and the issues of empathy. But after that, when you seriously work on empathy, then the surveys are just about, wow, okay, we're telling our people empathy is working.
Yes.
But I mean, if people are enjoying, I always say this to people who come in my emotional intelligence training, that people reporting to you, if they enjoy coming to office on Monday morning,
yeah,
and also enjoy the Friday evening, you got a great workplace.
Absolutely.
They must have those Saturday, Sundays, the weekends. They must have a good time. But when they come back on Monday, they must feel like coming on Monday. And they must be engaged on Monday. And if you can create that kind of environment, you got it.
Absolutely. So Niket, as we bring our discussion to a close, we started from identifying empathy coaches in the organization to drive it. We talked about work designs to be built in an empathetic way to build ownership and accountability in the people, and doing more on empathy on a continuous basis to make sure that the organization's KPIs are certainly met without having to work. Hard work is definitely there, but then you don't need to have bad blood spilling over to get those KPIs met. What is some of the parting comments you would like to give to our audience?
Empathy and profits are linked. That's one.
Okay.
Empathy and attrition is also linked.
And attrition is linked. Okay.
Empathy and teamwork is linked. Empathy and respect is linked.
Okay.
Empathy and relationships are linked. Right? The conversations of empathy, prototyping of empathy is extremely important. We don't know when the next black swan effect is going to come.
True.
And when it comes, if there's no foundation of empathy in the organization, forget about absorbing the black swan event. Organizations may not be able to take the next black swan event. That is my worry. That is reflecting in the current research that I'm conducting. You don't know. The world is in a flux. It's extremely volatile. Supply chains are getting disrupted every day.
Yeah.
You don't know, because black swan events are low probability, high impact. They cannot be predicted.
Yeah.
If you want to be ready and resilient for the next black swan event, get empathy into your organization. Very crucial. I think with that thought, we can certainly end. But I would also like to say that there's so much of research that we're currently publishing on the business resilience newsletter on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You should definitely subscribe, because these are very interesting researches that are coming, and I have given myself a target of the number of researches that I am publishing.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. Second is, of course, the showcase on design thinking with Niket Karasgi, where
Yeah.
this video is also getting beamed, and you may also have a lot of articles coming there. Certain researches on design thinking will also come there.
Yeah.
So I would definitely suggest that the viewers, people who are there watching us, do subscribe to the newsletter, the business resilience newsletter. It's there on my LinkedIn profile. You can just click it and take it. And you must also get onto the showcase on LinkedIn, which is Design Thinking with Niket Karasgi. A lot of content is going to move there for sure. It already has a lot of content.
Yeah, it has.
It has huge amount of content, but I think there's a lot more research that's happening, and it will come. And I think that's where we'd like to end.
Sure.
Empathy is mandatory before the next Black Swan event. I think we can end the show with that.
Absolutely, Niket. Thank you very much for summarizing it so well for our audience.
Thank
As
you.
usual.
You again. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Niket. Bye.